Dogs experience emotions in ways that often feel eerily human. When they lose someone they love, especially a handler who is their entire world, the grief they endure is profound. It's not just sadness. It's a deep, aching sorrow that manifests in ways that can break even the hardest hearts. For AK9, who spent years bonded to their handler, the loss isn't just emotional. It's physical, too. Dogs are creatures of routine. They find comfort in the familiar, the sound of their handler's voice, the rhythm of their daily walks, the scent of the person they love. When all of that disappears overnight, they don't understand why. They only know that something is wrong, and the world no longer feels safe. Dogs show grief in ways that can seem subtle at first. Some become restless, pacing around the house, searching for the person who's gone. Others, like this retired K9, sink into a quiet depression. They withdraw from the world, refusing food and losing interest in everything that once made them happy. It's as though their spirit is slowly unraveling. Scientists and veterinarians have studied this kind of mourning, and the findings are heartbreaking. Dogs are deeply social animals, and the bond they form with their humans is more than just loyalty. It's attachment, similar to the connection between a child and a parent. When that bond is broken, the dog's brain reacts in a way that mirrors human grief. The stress hormones spike, appetite drops, sleep patterns change, their energy drains, and in severe cases, they can become so overwhelmed by the emotional pain that their bodies physically deteriorate. For working dogs like K9S, the loss hits even harder. These dogs aren't just pets, they're partners. They spend every waking moment at their handler's side, facing danger together, training together, and relying on one another for safety. That kind of relationship leaves an imprint that doesn't fade easily. When a handler dies, the K9 isn't just losing a friend. They're losing their purpose. Handlers are more than caregivers. They're the dog's guide through the world. They give commands that the dog trusts without question. They offer praise, reassurance, and comfort. For a retired K9, that bond is still strong, even if the job is over. When the handler is suddenly gone, the dog doesn't know how to process it. Their sense of security is shattered. Many grieving dogs, like this one, refuse food. It's a powerful sign of emotional distress. In the wild, animals that stop eating are often in despair, and the same instinct plays out in domesticated dogs. They aren't rejecting food because they don't like it. They're rejecting life without their person. Experts say that dogs can also experience something akin to separation anxiety, but on a much deeper level. They become hyper-aware of the sounds and smells around them, hoping for any sign of their lost human. Some dogs even stay close to items that smell like their handler, a shirt, a blanket, or a favorite chair, because that's all they have left. For this retired K9, the smell of his handler still lingered in the house. He curled up by the door, by the chair, by the uniform his handler once wore. It was his only connection to life he once knew. Every day without his partner felt like a lifetime, and his heart couldn't make sense of the emptiness. People might wonder if dogs really understand death. The truth is, they understand loss. They feel absence. They recognize that someone who was always there is no longer coming back. They may not grasp the finality of death the way humans do, but they feel the void it leaves behind. Some grieving dogs eventually bounce back, especially if they're surrounded by love and comfort. But for a dog as bonded as this K9, the loss was more than he could handle. He wasn't just sad, he was lost. His handler wasn't just his partner. He was his everything. Without him, life didn't feel worth living. Each day that passed wasn't just another day without food or play. It was another day waiting for a face that wouldn't return. Another day his heart held on to the hope that maybe, just maybe, his person would walk through the door. The world around him kept moving, but for him, time had stopped. He wasn't ready to let go. He didn't know how. Word spread quickly about the retired K9's heartbreaking state. Friends, neighbors, and former colleagues of his handler couldn't stand to watch him waste away. This wasn't just any dog. He was a hero who had spent years protecting his community. He deserved more than to suffer in silence, trapped in his grief. People began showing up, hoping to comfort him. Fellow officers, some of whom had worked alongside the K9 and his handler, visited frequently. They spoke to him softly, calling his name and offering treats. He lifted his head each time, his ears twitching at the sound of familiar voices. For a second, there was a flicker of hope in his eyes. But when he didn't see his handler, that hope disappeared just as fast. He lowered his head again, his body sinking back into the floor, as if the weight of his sorrow was too much to bear. One officer brought an old uniform shirt that belonged to the handler. The shirt still carried his scent. When the dog smelled it, something changed. His nose twitched, and he let out a faint, broken whimper. He buried his face in the fabric, holding on to that last, precious trace of his partner. He refused to let go. The community wasn't ready to give up on him. People took turns sitting with him, talking to him, hoping their presence might bring even a small sense of comfort. Kids from the neighborhood, who once admired him as a brave police dog, came by to see him. They remembered the days when he would walk proudly beside his handler, his head high, his eyes sharp and focused. Now, seeing him curled up and defeated, they couldn't believe this was the same dog. One child brought a drawing of him and his handler together, a picture of happier times. The K-9 stared at it for a moment, then nudged it gently with his nose before curling back into his sorrowful ball. It was as though he recognized the image, but couldn't bring himself to face it. Veterinarians and animal behavior specialists were consulted. They explained that dogs, especially ones with such a powerful bond to a single person, could fall into deep depression after a loss. But no one needed an expert to see that this dog wasn't just sad. He was heartbroken. He was mourning in a way that felt painfully human. Some suggested getting another dog to keep him company, hoping companionship might help him heal. Others thought a change of scenery might break the cycle of grief. But nothing seemed right. This wasn't about loneliness or boredom. He didn't want another dog or a new place to live. He wanted his handler, the one thing no one could give him. Still, the people who loved him refused to let him slip away. Officers organized a memorial service to honor his handler, and they made sure the K-9 was there. They hoped that somehow, seeing everyone gathered, hearing familiar voices, and feeling the warmth of the people who cared for him might help him understand that he wasn't alone. During the service, the K-9 sat quietly. He didn't fidget or move. He just stared ahead, his body still, and his eyes locked on the uniformed officers standing at attention. It was as if he knew this wasn't an ordinary gathering. This was for his partner. When the handler's badge number was called out one last time, followed by the words, "End of watch," the K-9's ears perked up, his head tilted slightly, and for a moment, it seemed like he was listening, waiting, but when silence followed, his head dropped again. A low, mournful sound escaped him, a noise that cut to the crowd like a knife. It wasn't a bark or a whimper. It was something deeper, more painful, the sound of a soul that couldn't let go. After the service, people surrounded him with gentle words and comforting touches. He leaned into them, accepting the kindness. But it wasn't the same. It would never be the same. The only person he wanted was gone. Back home, the community continued to rally around him. People brought food, blankets, and toys, even though he barely acknowledged them. They sat with him, day after day, giving him whatever comfort they could. They refused to let him feel abandoned. Even in his heartbreak, he wasn't alone. The people who loved his handler now loved him just as fiercely. They weren't going to let him disappear into his grief, not without a fight. Police dogs aren't just animals. They're partners, protectors, and loyal friends of their handlers. From the moment they start training, an unbreakable bond begins to form. Day after day, they train together, work together, and face dangerous situations side by side. It's not just about obeying commands. It's about trust. The handler becomes the dog's entire world, the one person they rely on for guidance, comfort, and safety. And for the handler, that K-9 becomes more than a tool for law enforcement. They become family. These dogs learn to read their handler's voice, their body language, and even their emotions. They know when their human is tense, scared, or in danger. In the line of duty, they don't hesitate to protect their partner, even if it means putting their own life on the line. This isn't something that ends when a uniform comes off or when the dog retires. That bond runs deeper than any job. When a K-9 retires, many handlers choose to adopt them, giving them a loving home for the rest of their days. After years of serving together, It feels natural to keep their partner close. For the dog, the handler is home, the only comfort they truly know. Even when they're no longer chasing criminals or searching for missing people, they still want to stay by their handler's side. Imagine what it's like for a dog that has spent nearly every moment of its life with one person, only to suddenly lose them. Dogs don't understand death the way humans do. They don't get explanations or closure. All they know is that their person is gone, and they're not coming back. For a loyal, loving canine, that loss is earth-shattering. Handlers often describe their canines as having almost human-like emotions. They're not just working dogs. They feel happiness, excitement, fear, and even grief. When a handler passes away, it's not uncommon for the dog to show signs of deep sadness. They wait by the door, hoping their human will walk through it. They lose interest in food, toys, and even the things they once loved. It's as if their entire world goes dark. For a retired canine, that loss is even more painful. They've already left a job that once gave them purpose. Now they've lost a person who gave them love and security. It's not just grief. It's confusion, heartbreak, and a loneliness they can't escape. The connection between a canine and a handler is something that can't easily be put into words. It's a bond built on trust and loyalty, but it's also built on shared experiences, the long nights, the dangerous situations, the quiet moments in between. They've been through it all together. Losing that is more than just losing a friend. It's losing a part of themselves. It started like any other day, but something fell off. The retired K9, once full of energy and life, seemed different. He wasn't running to the door when visitors came. His tail, which usually wagged happily at the sight of his handler, barely moved. His eyes, once sharp and alert, looked distant, almost empty, when news of his handler's passing reached those around him. The dog's behavior began to make sense. He wasn't just tired. He wasn't sick. He was grieving. He waited by the door, expecting his handler to walk in like they always did. Hours passed, but no one came. He stared at the spot where his partner used to sit, hoping, waiting. Then he stopped eating. At first, people thought it was stress. Maybe he was confused by the sudden change. But days turned into weeks, and he still refused food. Treats, his favorite meals, nothing tempted him. He wasn't interested in playing, walking, or even getting affection from others. It was as if life didn't matter to him anymore. He wasn't just mourning. He was fading away. The most heartbreaking part wasn't the way he stopped eating. It was the way he still waited. Every time the door opened, his ears perked up, his head lifted with a glimmer of hope. But when he realized it wasn't his handler, his head sank back down. The light in his eyes dimmed a little more each time. He wandered the house, visiting the places they used to sit together. He lay by his handler's old chair, curling up as close as he could, as if the scent alone might bring comfort. Some nights he whimpered softly, as if calling out to his lost partner. Neighbors, friends, and fellow officers came by to check on him. They tried to comfort him, giving him gentle pats and kind words. Some even brought their own dogs, hoping the company might help. But nothing could replace the one he had lost. He looked at everyone the same way, with quiet, hopeless eyes that seemed to ask, "Where's my person?" The dog wasn't just grieving. He was holding on to the last thread of hope that his handler might somehow come back. He didn't understand why they were gone. All he knew was that his world wasn't right anymore, and he couldn't move on. As the days stretched on, his body grew weaker. He had always been a strong, muscular dog, but now his ribs started to show. His steps became slower, and his once powerful stance looked unsteady. It wasn't just emotional pain now. His physical health was slipping, too. The people who cared for him felt helpless. They tried everything, different foods, vet visits, familiar voices, but nothing worked. It wasn't about the food. It wasn't about the treats or the toys. He didn't want any of that. He wanted his handler. Each day, his energy faded more. He stopped getting up to greet visitors. His tail no longer moved, even when people spoke to him in soft, encouraging voices. It was clear he wasn't giving up on his handler, but he was giving up on life without them. The home, once filled with warmth and companionship, felt eerily quiet. The sound of his paws tapping on the floor was gone. The playful barking that once echoed through rooms was replaced with silence. The only sound left was the occasional sigh from a heartbroken dog, still waiting for a reunion that would never come. Days turned into weeks, and though the retired K9's body grew weaker, his spirit still seemed tied to his handler. He lingered in the same familiar spots: the doorway, the chair, the bed where his partner once rested. His eyes held a distant, hollow look, as if he wasn't fully present anymore. He wasn't living in this new reality. He was stuck in the past, waiting for the life he once knew to return. The officers who came by tried everything to lift his spirits. They brought his favorite toy from the station, a worn-out tennis ball he used to chase around during downtime. One officer tossed it gently, calling his name with a hopeful, encouraging voice. The K9 lifted his head, his eyes barely focusing on the ball as it rolled to a stop. He stared at it for a moment, but the light that once sparked excitement in his eyes was gone. He rested his head back down with a slow sigh. It wasn't just a toy anymore. Without his handler there to throw it, it was nothing more than a reminder of what he'd lost. More people stepped in to help. Friends of his handler spent hours by his side, telling stories, hoping their familiar voices would stir something in him. They talked about old cases, the moments of triumph, and the times they all shared. But the dog barely reacted. He listened quietly, his ears twitching now and then, but his eyes stayed distant. It was like he wasn't hearing the words, only searching for the one voice he knew he'd never hear again. The K9's health declined faster than anyone expected. He was once a powerful, strong dog, built for speed, agility, and endurance. Now, his ribs showed through his thinning fur. His legs wobbled when he tried to stand, and his steps were slow and unsteady. He was a shadow of the proud, fearless K9 he once was. Even the vet admitted there wasn't much more they could do. His body wasn't giving up on its own, his heart was. He didn't want to live without his handler. He was holding on to a hope that was slowly killing him. One night, something strange happened. The house was quiet, and the dog lay in his usual spot near the door. His breathing was slow and shallow, his body still. Then his ears perked up, his head lifted, weak but alert. His nose twitched as if he smelled something familiar. For the first time in weeks, his tail moved, just barely. His eyes, once so empty, seemed to light up. He stood, shaky but determined, and walked toward the door. He let out a small, soft whine, then sat down, his gaze fixed on the entrance. It was as if he expected someone to walk through it. No one did, but he didn't seem sad this time. His body relaxed. His tail thumped gently against the floor. He laid down right there by the door, his head resting on his paws. His breathing slowed again, but this time it wasn't strained. It was peaceful. He closed his eyes. By morning, he was gone. The officers who found him said he looked calm, almost content. It was as if he had finally found the peace he had been waiting for all along. He wasn't alone anymore. In his heart, he must have felt that his handler had come back for him, and that was enough. The community came together once more, not just to mourn his loss, but to celebrate his life. He wasn't just a dog. He was a partner, a hero, and a symbol of unwavering loyalty. His story wasn't just about grief. It was about love, a love so strong that even death couldn't break it.